going to go ahead and start getting started. And so I am so excited to begin this dialogue because this is something that is very near and dear to my heart. And so my name is Serene A. Reese-Gaines, and I'm the principal and founder of Brainy HR Solutions, which is a human resources firm that focuses also on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And that is the work that I do. But the purpose for my life is really ensuring that there are equitable practices in education. And that is what preempted today's discussion. So today is part 2 of a 4-part series where we really want to have discussion about the importance of education across all of these discussions. But today's specific discussion is about school choice. And so we know that school choice is critically important because it informs the quality of education and many times your outcome, right? Where you land in terms of your academic journey, and possibly even the quality of education that you receive, and also how you feel about education. Right? So when you feel that you're welcomed in an educational environment, very often it nurtures your desire to want to continue to learn. And we also know that there are situations that sometimes students and adults alike are not exposed to positive academic experiences, and that in turn could very well turn you off from academics. I personally believe that education is the gateway to success, and it can certainly become the key differentiator in turning a person's life around. And so with that, that is what has led to this series. And so the goal for this series is to make sure that caregivers, that parents, that community members, that you walk away with the tools that you need in order to ensure that your children are getting exactly what it is they need in order to thrive in school and outside of school. So thank you, and welcome all to this discussion. And so I want to first and foremost welcome my panelists who are instrumental in this dialogue today. And so I am going to close my mouth and allow them to introduce themselves because their positionality really does provide this insight that we need in order to continue to grow and thrive as community members. So I'm going to hand it off to Damedia Edwards first. Demedia, do you want to introduce yourself to our wonderful attendees today?
Sure, I would love to. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. Hello, everyone. I'm Damedia Edwards, and I am a 20-plus year educator here in the state of Texas. I currently serve as a director of literacy here in Aldine ISD, which is a district that is on the north side of Houston. And prior to this role, I was a school principal for 5 years and an assistant principal, and have served in various leadership capacities here in Texas. And Serene and I are classmates, soon to be graduating, classmates at Baylor University. And I'm excited to be part of this really important discussion and to just dialogue with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here. And so now I would love to turn it over to Janay Saunders, who is going to introduce herself and really provide some amazing perspective as well to this dialogue.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Janay Saunders. I'm actually a STEM teacher. I teach science and math, and this year I'm going to be teaching also, and I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Can everybody make sure they're on mute? I'm sorry, Janay. I want to make sure everyone hears this. Can you put yourselves on mute, folks, please? All right. Ms. Sanders?
Thank you. But I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation because I do feel like all students need to have access to education. It needs to be an equitable education for all, as well as something that you feel like you can relate to culturally. And that's really why I feel like this conversation is truly important. So thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for having me here as well. And I'm excited to share in this dialogue with you and Demedia as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so let's get started, right? Because I do think so. We had a preface discussion before this session today, and one of the questions that we wanted to start with today is very, very fundamental. And it may feel like it's kind of like a duh, right? Like, of course, we know what that is, but it's important because education has changed over time. And so this fundamental question is, what is the purpose of school and education? Like, what's really the purpose? And so I want to hand it over to Janay to get us started on this discussion. So Janay, what is the purpose of school from your perspective?
The purpose of school is essentially to provide students with the opportunity to grow and to reach their overall highest potential. I do believe that schools should first and foremost think about the pathway for each of their students on an individual level and um, determine their path along with them, to see where they want to go. And that speaks to the whole student instead of only thinking about what data benchmarks you want to meet and what your state testing scores look like. I feel like we should all start with like, where do you want to be in 20 years? Where do you want to be in 5 years? And just trying to speak to that whole student and learning their interest. And schools should actually be developing the student as a person, their soul, their love, how they produce that and show that to the world. So that's what I feel like the purpose of schools are for.
That's powerful. And so I think the key piece you touched on here is love, right? The relationship aspect, right? So it's not just about the fundamentals of education itself, right? So, we speak so much about the grades and my little one who's on here, EOGs and how there's this, oh, I have to do well in EOGs. But what about the rest of it? Demedia, what would you add to that? What is the purpose of school?
So I thought a lot about this question, and honestly, it took me back to my own experiences as a young student. School was a place where I felt that I belonged, where I felt challenged and encouraged. And if you think about how schools operate nowadays, we're more than just a learning institution. Of course, that's our primary aim, is that we need to produce students that are literate and able to go out and think and be productive members of their society intellectually. But we also have this charge to create a space where students are growing. It's a microcosm of the world, right? So you have all of these students with diverse backgrounds and diverse needs in one place. So kids are doing more than just academically learning. They're learning about themselves and about culture and about their positionality in this world. And so when I think about why schools exist, I think that the meaning has evolved over time. And now we're looking at things beyond just the academic needs of our students. And as Janay said, thinking about how we can meet them where they are and grow them. And in more than just academic ways, because we know that kids are more than just scores, test scores, and data, that these are lives that we're entrusted with.
I agree. I could not agree more. Bravo to that. And the reality is that in order to, and Janay, you touched on this, in order to develop the entire child, you have to view them holistically, right? And I think there's this differentiation that educators have to have when they look at children. And so I think part of the hegemonic society, and we talk about that a lot in our academic journey, but this standard of what a good student is, and the expectation is when you're a good student, you behave in a way that may not challenge authority. You may not ask as many questions, right? That standard is that you are this well-behaved, high producing from, a qualitative grade level, quantitative. You're this high producing child, but in many instances, that child isn't allowed to challenge and to learn how to think. right? And so fundamentally, what we know education had been, which has evolved, and we know that there are so many different methods of teaching, but originally it was the good students are those who raise their hand, who do exactly as they're told, who behave exactly as they're told. But what happens is you end up creating this uniformity that children can't feel like they can break out of, which then hides the prize, right? It hides the beautiful gifts that they bring with them, and it stunts their ability to then develop holistically, as both of you mentioned. And so when we know that to be true, and we know, as we've just mentioned, the whole ideology of school is to develop this holistic child. Yes, do we want them to perform well academically? Absolutely. But because you don't secure those scores that may be considered in that high category, the A or the B, that doesn't mean that you're not going to be successful, because very likely and almost always there are these other elements that allow you to thrive. But if there's this very singular approach to how educators are looking at our students, it puts them in a position where it's going to be very difficult for them to succeed, because they don't see themselves as winning if they're not as strong academically. So that piece, I think, is super important, just to kind of add on to both what both of you stated. And so my second question is, what should parents and caregivers consider when determining school selection for their children? And so we know that a high performing school and a school that understands them culturally is critically important. But we also know that there are misnomers and myths. So, Demedia, talk to us a little bit about that.
So this is another question that I really spent a lot of time thinking about, because I know that we have been maybe programmed in some ways to think that you can't have one, that you can't have both. That if a school is high performing, then likely that school lacks diversity or inclusive practices. When I think about the best education for my own child and the education that I try to provide for other people's children, it's a combination of both. It's a school that has high expectations for students' learning, but also embraces the journey of growth, and a school that has inclusive practices, that really values, respects, and creates a sense of belonging for all students. And I don't just mean by considering race and ethnicity, but intellectual diversities in other areas that are inclusive practices that have to be in place in order for our students to feel that they belong. The schools are not ours. The schools belong to the communities and to the students. And so when we adopt that mindset and we get serious about making sure that our schools are doing both things well, that's how we're going to produce those schools or produce students that are really ready to go out and tackle the world. And it's a challenge as a parent and as an educator. It's a challenge in today's world.
Agreed. Janay, anything to add to that? I think you're muted. I think you're muted.
Am I still muted?
Oh, there you go. There you go.
I completely agree with everything Demedia just said. And honestly, to add to that, I feel like one of the main things I try to because I mainly work with middle school, I also try to think in steps. So for me, I would try to tell them, like, step one is considering how is your child going to transition from a home environment to a school environment, and not mainly because of virtual learning, just period, like the procedures and the things that they're and the just the cultural experiences that they're having in school. How is that going to translate into your household? And then vice versa, the things that you're doing at home, how is that going to translate into the school environment? And I feel like that would be something that I would ask myself first as a parent or as a caregiver, and I would talk to my child about that as well, just to see if those skills will be transferable, the experiences are transferable, and to see if we are both in a place where we are open to those experiences that may not be transferable as well. And that to me would be like my first checkpoint with that experience, and will they develop my child as a whole? And that goes back to the cultural piece for me. Like, I am a strong believer in your child is going to produce based on the effort that they want to put in, based on how motivated they feel to do it. So they even may not be at a high performing school, but your child may want to go above and beyond what the school is requiring because they love what they're doing so much, because that school culturally fit them. And you can also transfer those skills back at home and say, you know what, we're going to put an extra emphasis on this project. Let me email your teacher. I'm going to talk to your teacher because you really love that class, like, and that's how you can, I feel like, build your child up and bring them up to that level. But I would always also consider like trying to get both, trying to get that high performance school and that culture experience in one, because this, I feel like the sky's the limit at that point.
I agree 100%. And I also think that I agree completely. While there are schools that, excuse me, are high performing and have the resources, there are many that may not be as high performing and they don't have the resources. And so, right, when we think about, for example, one of my daughter's friends, her mom, she and I were conversing yesterday, and I asked her mom, I said, is your daughter going to go to the same school? My daughter's in public school. And she said, no, I pulled her out and I put her into a private school. And I said, oh, really? Okay, why? She was like, I just didn't feel like they had everything that we needed as a family for my daughter to flourish. And I respect that completely. Now, this is a blue ribbon school where we live. But even in the research that I'm doing, when you look at Charlotte, the state of North Carolina as a whole, and then you look at Charlotte, it is a tale of two cities. So in South Charlotte, there are schools that are, schools we know are funded by taxes. And there are schools that have, master's level educators. They have all the resources in terms of MacBooks or Chromebooks, and they have all of these lacrosse and all of these other things. But literally, you can drive not even an hour, 15 minutes outside of South Charlotte, and you have one of the lowest performing schools. And in those schools, they are mostly children of color. They are. And so you have parents who may not have the wherewithal, or who may not have the resources to make a decision like Mackenzie's friend to put their child in a private school. And therein lies part of this challenge. Right? Therein lies the challenge. What do you do? Because in that particular situation, and I don't think that the racial identity really matters as much in this situation, in this scenario, because you can have, an African American or a BIPOC parent who wants to put their child in, a better school, and they put that child in a school that's performing highly, and there aren't many students that look like them, or the teachers aren't culturally competent. Right? Because they're looking at them through this lens of hegemonic kind of views, right? Conversely, you can have a person who has the resources, be it black, white, etc., who wants their child to have this diverse environment. But maybe the access that they have there will not be as much. And so I agree with you, Janay. I think it's so important to have this culturally complex dynamic in an academic experience, because I think one of the mistakes that we make is thinking that, even if you have the means, that it isn't important to have this knowledge of other races and abilities and etc. And you have to. So my question to you all is, what can you expect from educators when, it may not be as diverse a school? What can you expect as a baseline for educators to provide to your student, your child, through the lens of cultural competency? And what is just kind of beyond their realm? But I think sometimes we need to know, am I asking too much? I said before, I'm one of those parents, right? They see me coming, they're like, oh God, here she comes. Right? Because I'm all, you're one of them too. I'm all involved. And most times I really don't know if I'm doing the most. I don't know. I don't really care, but I would like to know. So to my educators, I want to throw it over to you. Like, what as parents, what should we expect as a baseline requirement when we're looking for cultural competency in our educators and administrators? Anyone, go for it.
At doing the most, but on the back end, as a parent, you're never doing the most. But as I'm experiencing, I guess what you would call doing the most, yes, it does seem like a lot, but you're only trying to reassure yourself that your student is receiving the quality education that you expect. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I don't think you're really doing the most, to be honest. So keep doing that. And what you're really doing is challenging schools to step it up. So if you are a parent at a school that is maybe not pushing cultural competency because the population is very diverse, you might want to push a little harder to say, you know what, we need to have this conversation because this is our future. We just saw something happen back in January in Capitol Hill that is occurring 300 some odd years after, some things that we've gone through, 50 years after some things that we've gone through. And you would almost think that we would not be experiencing those events, but I think it's very important for schools who are diverse, who may not have that many children of color, even if your student body is 10%. If you have 10% of students of color in your school, then you still need to have that conversation, have the floor and the door open, because these students are going to affect our future. They're going to affect our policy. They're going to affect our science. They're going to affect our culture. They're going to affect our social media, which is perceived and received as easy as 30 seconds. The world can access these tools. So I think as a parent, it is your job and your duty, and it's what you should do to do the most to make sure your child is getting that access. And if you can find a school that is I would say, I don't want to bring a race into it, but I'm a Black woman, so I will speak about the Black race. If you are, if your child is able to go to a school that, let's say, is 95% Black, you might want to challenge the teachers a little bit to speak about other cultures so that when they do step into the other world, they know how they might be viewed. They know how they should present themselves, as well as know to be confident and understand who you are and present yourself in a manner that you wish to be presented. But I think it's both I think it's best to do the most as a parent and push on the school if you're not receiving the care and the access that you want to receive.
Absolutely. So I have you've all heard it. I've been given permission to continue to do the most. Demedia, what do you add to that?
I'm also in the doing the most club. But when it comes to my baby, my only one, I feel that the same way every other parent feels. We want our child to get the very best that school has to offer to them. And in terms of cultural competence, what you can expect from a school, first off, is you should see and feel that there are practices in place at your child's school that really value diversity. And I don't mean just having a Hispanic Heritage Month potluck for the staff and doing a program. I mean, really having conversations and seeing practices in the school that support and respect different people. So things as simple as having someone in the front office who can speak different languages that can help support and welcome visitors, or sending communications home in the languages that are needed so that you can communicate to parents. So those are a few of the things that come to mind when I think about practices that are inclusive and creating that space where students feel that they belong and their families feel that they belong as well. And in doing so, educators also, the teachers, the staff have to embrace this idea too, that we may not necessarily look like our students, but that we are not here to do them any harm, that our goal is to get to know them. Our goal is to understand them and the unique experiences that they have, because our students come to our classrooms with wonderful backgrounds and things that they have that they can add to that academic environment. So as a parent, you should expect to see your students' horizons being broadened. And as Janay said, that goes all ways. So even if your child is in a school that's predominantly like themselves or a school that's not, that should be the case and that should be the standard.
Absolutely, 100%. And, one of the things that we think about, that we should think about when we're ensuring that our children get the diverse access that they need is ask your educators, what kind of books are we reading? Right? Janay, go ahead. Go ahead. We can't hear you. We can't hear you. And this is good. I know it's good. There you go.
So I was co-signing because as Demedia was speaking, she also touched on that, and I immediately thought like it's going to be in the curriculum.
Yes.
That's something that I do know that schools have been trying to implement, whether it's during the festive month, or if a holiday was coming up. I know that New York City public schools, they gave extra holidays to celebrate the Jewish religion, I believe. So I do know that schools are doing things to prepare students to be a part of the world and understand how cultural competency is necessary. So the curriculum is one thing that I do see changing a lot. So I think parents should be very excited about that.
Absolutely. I want to throw this out to our parents, to our attendees. Any questions or comments that you want to add here to this dialogue? Because I do think this piece is really, really important. So please, by all means, unmute yourself and let's chat. Do we have a shy group? I think we do. I think we do.
So I'll jump in. And so my question would really be, given sort of the effects of the pandemic, right? And as this Delta variant is on the rise, unfortunately, and the potential of kids going back to a virtual learning environment, right? And we're looking to create this cultural competency in the classroom. What are some things that parents should focus on with their schools to make sure that that still happens in a virtual learning environment?
I'll jump in there. We saw last year with across the nation as students were primarily learning at home and as schools started to open the doors that we still had a large percentage of students that were at home learning. And it's very, very easy for students to get disconnected when they're learning at home because they don't have those day-to-day face-to-face interactions with their peers. But I think simple things that teachers and educators can do to help continue to build those bridges between students is creating opportunities for students to collaborate. So maybe it means giving them a project or an inquiry-based assignment where students can get on a Zoom call or they can interact with one another in those ways. I think the biggest idea is that we want to make sure that educators are still creating the opportunities for our students to have those social and academic interactions with one another. And in doing so, it helps students to feel plugged in and connected to school in a way that they may not otherwise feel if they're learning at home for another year.
I agree. And, Janay, do you want to add to that?
I don't have to. If you want to go ahead. I was starting to think about an idea as Demedia was speaking, but I do believe that if we're in your house, then we're in your house. So if we're in a virtual setting and you are celebrating something of your culture, if you do have something extra going on in your household, if you feel comfortable sharing that, I do feel like it's okay to send your child's teacher an email and ask, like, can we incorporate this into the classroom to make sure this is continuing? And I feel like that allows, I I would say, like, for me, when I had a student who would say had a younger sister crying in the background, I didn't tell them to go on mute. I said it's fine because I know that you're home and I know that you're with your siblings. So that's what I mean with that sentiment, with that same sentiment. If you're having a celebratory event, if you're cooking this beautiful meal and you want to post a picture about it in your chat, post it in the chat, write a summary about it. That could be like a do now question, like, and that could even work towards team building activities. Let's go back. What did Hakeem say about the food that he ate yesterday? What did you really enjoy? Would you be willing to cook that? And I feel like you can even tie that into so many subjects. That's history. That's writing, science. We can cook it. You know what I'm saying? Math. How many measurements? I always break it down to STEM. I'm always gonna break it down to STEM. But I feel like if you're having that going on in your house, there's nothing wrong with emailing the teacher. If you don't feel comfortable emailing the teacher, there's probably a grade team leader or a cultural leader, which would be the dean, that you can email about those things. So I feel like pushing on your teachers, there's nothing wrong with that, honestly.
I love it. I love it. And so I think the other part is sometimes we feel as parents that when you're the only one in the room, when you're the only one in the room and your child is the only one in the room, and I think hopefully everybody knows what I mean by that, being the only. And of course, in academia, especially higher education, very often I have felt that in boardrooms, I have felt that, the only woman or the only woman of color. And I think sometimes there's a reluctancy to then share that part of yourself, right? But I agree with you 100%, Janay. You have to be willing to do that because it also gives folks the opportunity to get to know you. Because as we know, the things that we think we know about people, irrespective of their religion, their race, their ability, all of it is fed through social media, right? Through social media. And it usually isn't based on your circle of trust, right? The people that you know. I mean, think about the people that are your closest friends. In many instances, they look like you, they think like you, they're the same religion, etc. And so in many instances, we don't push ourselves outside of our comfort zone for fear of being rejected. But for parents, and as Janay and Demedia said, it's important for us to open up that door to say, no, we're inviting you in, because the reality is that when we invite individuals in to understand us, go for it. Yep. I love, what were you saying? I love it. Go, Janay.
Parents, teacher, and student. Or if you want to take teacher and call it the whole school, it has to be a trinity. That's the only way it's going to work. And if the student knows that we're connected with the parent and we have a relationship, they're going to work even harder, or they're going to think about the way they come in, and it's definitely a trinity. I'm sorry. I just got that impulse because I always think.
It's true. It is the Trinity. It's that partnership. What are you saying, Demedia?
To her point, I was nodding and I'm actually jotting down what she said because I'm taking the notes, taking some notes, but I agree. It has to be a partnership and it can't be one-sided. So I love the way that you asked that question, Serene, earlier about what can parents expect? But then on the flip side, what can parents do to insert themselves and to be part of the solution? So let's say your child is at a school that's academically not quite where you need it to be. So what are the questions that you're asking, or how are you really trying to partner with the school and saying, okay, let's figure out what the priorities are. And as parents, as stakeholders, how can we be part of that work?
Absolutely, 100%. And I think the other part to take away from this is it's not optional anymore to not be culturally competent. It's never been an option, but it's definitely not an option now. And so as parents, and caregivers and community leaders, we have to feel comfortable saying, no. I want to know about the Asian Indian students. I want to know about the Native American students. I want to know how the Jewish, faith, how they celebrate. And I want people to know, right, how we celebrate. What is Kwanzaa? Like, I want them to know. I want to know that. And so it becomes incumbent upon us to start to create and normalize these questions and expectations and be comfortable in doing the most, right? I mean, we have to if we really want to effectuate change. Any of our parents or caregivers want to add to that?
Yes. Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Go for it.
Yes. What Janay was saying was 100% correct. I have my kids are out of school right now. My youngest is 22. But when I was very involved with the PTA, and it was a group that was with parents and teachers where they give ideas. We used to do something like an international night where parents would get together and they would cook different dishes, and everybody would get to see everybody's culture. And like they used to have some time like every month where you will learn about, as far as like Hispanic Heritage Month, Black History Month, and everybody would get to know. But it has to start in the beginning. It has to start at elementary school level. It has to start at kindergarten. So that way, when you have that job and you're around these other people and you're the only one in the room, you understand that person. That person, that other person make you feel more comfortable because you're understanding each other's culture. And this is the whole thing when with New York City, they're putting more holidays for the Muslims. So we know about the holidays that the Muslims celebrate and more about their culture, but also about, like I said, the Jews and Indians, just all different cultures. But we need to have that at this beginning, at elementary school level. And the only way we're going to do that is that you show the kids, because it is part of history. You learn that in history, and we know that somewhat our history is kind of doctored. Like certain things we don't know that we need to know. But if you hear it from the people in your community, it's more real. It's more real. It teaches you more about life. It gives you connection. That's it.
Drop the mic. Drop the mic, sister. Drop the mic. Absolutely. And it's so funny that you said that because I am a Muslim. I'm an African American, born and bred. I'm Hispanic and Black, and I am a Muslim. And so a few things happen, right, when I share my religion and also my heritage, right? My father is Dominican, my mother is Black. And so I have heard so many times, oh, you are? Are you sure? Am I sure I'm a Muslim, or am I sure that I'm African American and Hispanic? And yes to both. But the reality is that sometimes when we look at people, we assume we know who and what they are. Right? And so it benefits us to then have open the space, right? Because some people may be offended, right? If you ask, oh, where are you from? Oh, I'm from America. Thank you very much. Right. But it's important, though, that if we really want people to have a peek inside behind the curtain, that we're willing to share a part of who we are so that they can understand the beautiful diversity even within our cultures, right? There's one cartoon that I've seen, this image that says, don't ask me what all Black people think. I'm only one of them. I'm only one of them. It benefits you more to have multiple discussions because we are not a monolith. None of us. None of us are monoliths, right? So that piece is really, really important. That was so, so, so well said. Oh, hey, Auntie, thank you so much. You dropped the mic. Anybody else want to add to that? Because I do think that is so, so very germane to this discussion. All right, so I have another question. When a parent decides that there isn't enough diversity of thought in an academic institution, how do they then augment their child's experiences so that they do get the level of multicultural exposure that they need in order to feel that differences are normal? Demedia, let me throw that to you.
So that question has really had me stumped when I looked at it before, and I'm still thinking and processing through that. In the absence of diversity in a school, I would continue to make sure that my child, that I'm creating opportunities for her to be part of other things outside of school that exposes her to different people. So maybe having opportunities for her to volunteer, putting her in clubs or groups, or even things at church in which she can just experience other people. I think what you said about those little microaggressions, those comments that people make, and sometimes Ms. Delgado is laughing because we have this conversation often, that the things that people say are really just rooted in ignorance, because you're right, not every woman, not every Black woman, not every Hispanic woman has the same experience. And so I think we tear those walls down when we get to knowing other people, and we can say, well, I know a person who is like the one you're describing, and they're not any way that you're saying. And so kids have to get to that realization. So we have to create those spaces for our kids if they're not getting them authentically through their school experiences.
Absolutely. Janay,
Sorry, I went off on a tangent. I could
no,
talk
you
about
didn't.
microaggressions all day.
But you know what? We experience it so much. I'm actually doing a session on Monday with one of my clients on microaggressions. And one of the topics that I feel is always important when we're talking about microaggressions is to present the idea of micro interventions, right? Ms. Delgado is shaking her head yes, right? It's so important because, when you're in this position, I mean, if we unpack, right, what cultural assimilation is, right? And we know that in some environments, sometimes people feel inclined to blend versus, right, leveraging and adopting other elements of their culture and really loving the culture that they have. We know that when you don't do that, when you feel like you have to assimilate, in many instances, you put yourself in a position, or you feel like you're in this environment where you will very likely have to deal with microaggressions. And so the micro intervention element is exactly what you said. That hasn't been my experience, right? And learning how to have that conversation so that you open up this dialogue where it isn't a combative discussion, but it certainly is a disagreement. Like, really, I haven't had that experience. Here's what I've had. Or, I've seen it a little differently. Or, what made you think that? Like, why do you feel that way? So I do think it's really germane to this discussion, particularly when you're in an environment that you may not feel understands you culturally, right? So I do think it's really, really important. Janay, do you want to add anything to that, my friend?
I'm over here taking notes on what y'all are saying because so many thoughts were sparked as y'all were speaking. I would first talk about the at-home reinforcements. Just as the media stated, the things I feel like helped. Okay, well, I'll start with the interventions actually to give the backstory. I'm actually one of those people that can say that I've had Black teachers. And that's something that's always a conversation on social media. My first Black teacher was in college, and my first Black math teacher was on this level. And honestly, in junior high school and for high school, I had probably almost to 100% of my teachers were Black, and they were my chemistry teachers, they were my calculus teachers. So that to me, that's what I thought about when you talked about the intervention part. Like, it's like when people say that, I actually go, well, actually, the reason why I had these teachers were because I went to school in a specific neighborhood, or I went to a school that was specific toward my need. And that might be something that my mom did on purpose, and it might not be, but I am grateful for that experience because it allows me to give that alternate perspective and to let people know that people that are in my culture, I would say, know that actually we're out there and we're shaping lives, because that's why I'm here and I'm going to shape the next set of lives. And so just to speak to that, and I think that going back to the microaggressions, what I did not experience, the one thing my dad pushed on was music. But what I did not see a lot of were our movies. And I'm sure it's because of the graphic nature of certain things. Because my parents, I was raised in church, and my parents are very like formal in the way that they operate. So I wasn't really watching. Like Richard Pryor film when I was 12. But what I would say is they reinforced that as I got older. My friends would reinforce certain movies that were of the culture, like Do the Right Thing. And they would also show me other movies for other cultures that I would understand the storylines behind the things that they were experiencing. Church is also a form of reinforcement. Just playing basketball, having your son or your daughter going to play in the park is another form of reinforcement. Double Dutch. I talk to my kids about double dutch all the time because I'm like, we used to be outside on the street playing double dutch and getting to know each other. And that gives you a rhythm, that gives you a beat, that puts you in sync, gives you a flow, gives you understanding, creates a sisterhood. And that's something that I think would be an at-home type of reinforcement that just in case they don't receive that into the school, in their school. And I think what I'm ultimately saying is you have to think about the pipeline, because these microaggressions automatically they will ultimately lead to stress. And thinking about your culture, the way we eat, and the things that might happen to us when we're of a certain age. I don't like to speak things into existence, so I don't want to put any age, but we do know what happens once we turn 40 and 50, what happens to some of our men, and what happened to us during COVID. So I think that we should all consider that pipeline, and how can we have those early interventions to change our perspectives so that we don't have to deal with microaggressions. If we do deal with those microaggressions, we know how to handle them, and that our stress levels don't go through the roof because we're trying to earn $1 to live, and we're trying to push our kids to meet some expectation that was created by somebody else. And, yeah.
Love it. I love it. 100%. We have to normalize the importance of differences. We really do. And we have to embrace that. And it really starts at home. It starts at home, and it also starts with honoring who you are. You have to, right? Even if society says that you should be more like it. And that's why I really enjoy, I love different cultures, even different religions. And I go out of my way to expose myself to people who are different than I am. Because what it does, and I'll say this, sometimes we have these perceptions of people. And I'll even say, non-BIPOC people, right? People who are white, from the white culture. We have this embedded into our heads that they are the enemy, right? That they don't understand. And yes, maybe there are different levels of understanding, but the reality of it is we are all different in some kind of way. There is something that's called, and we know already, right? Intersectionality. And you spoke about it, Janay, right? But it's the intersection of age, gender, generation, race, religion. So at any given point, we are diverse. We may not be an African American, or we may not be Hispanic or Latin American, but we will be different. Our abilities will vary depending on our age at times. And so it benefits us that when we talk about diversity, that we really talk about it from a very broad perspective. And we recognize that while we may not understand every single element of a person's diversity, we respect it. And in order for us to respect it, we don't have to agree with it. We don't have to agree with it. We have to respect it. And so even when we think about the experiences that our children have in school, it becomes a shameful phenomenon when the school isn't intentional about exposing our children to differences, difference of political views. It's important. It's important. We don't have to have the same thought and feeling and emotion about everything, but we do have to have this love for one another from a basic humanistic perspective. And and because we don't identify specifically with what this person is experiencing doesn't make it untrue. It just means that we don't understand it. But the fundamental element is that we respect every single person, and every person has to have a voice. And when we teach that to our children, and when we make the school, the academic environment, understand the importance that that means to us in the overall holistic development of our children, then they start to understand that it is not optional, right? Teaching about diversity in other cultures and religions and beliefs and abilities is not optional. It is the world that we live in. And if we really want to thrive, we have to have that exposure. Otherwise, we do have this world full of microaggressions. Can I touch your hair? No, you may not. No, you may not, right? It's all of those things that we know to be true. And so I want to throw it out as always, right? Because we are almost out of time today, and this has been such a good conversation. But I want to throw it out to our audience, our attendees, to find out, is there something that you want to add here that we need this group to be able to carry forward as part of this discussion? Good. Then that means we're doing our job today. We're doing our job. And so, Janay, Demedia, if there was one thing that is action oriented that you would like for our family members, who I consider my family members on this call, our family members to take away as they're walking into this new academic year. Some of us have already started, but others are starting. What is that one action oriented thing that they can take with them to help their child grow and develop holistically in these environments, some environments that may not be as diverse or may not be as culturally competent? One thing.
So this may not be as applicable to this group because the fact that you're here means that you are vested and you have a vested interest in your child's education or in education in general. But to any parent or any stakeholder, I would say, get involved. Like I said at the beginning, the school is not that place where you just send your child. Like that is the place where your child goes to learn and thrive. Your schools, the leaders of that school, the PTA, you need to ask questions and be willing to partner with the school and be willing to say, okay, I understand that there's a need and maybe there's something that you see that's not happening at the school. How can we work together to institute something, or how can we start X, Y, and Z? And I think anyone who's approaching it with just an attitude of let's work together, let's partner together, is going to start to move the needle. And I'm going to do a shameless plug because I still feel very strongly and I believe very strongly in public schools. My child attends public schools. I too attended public schools and got a very wonderful education there. And I would just say, we don't need to give up on our public schools. Our public schools are doing the work right now. And these are some challenging times, and schools are re-strategizing. We're thinking about how we're going to push our students and meet them where they are and grow them even during this pandemic. So again, don't think about how you can be part of this solution. That's my action item.
I definitely concur. Do not give up on public schools. I came out of public school system, and I am a strong believer in the public school system will work for you and your family. It will work for your child. And it goes back to the communication, as Demedia said. So I literally, my notes say the conversation. Start with that conversation. Ask your child what they need. Ask the school what they can provide. First and foremost, you got to think about that pipeline of the student on an individual level. Where is their overall endpoint? Where's their midpoint? what's that first threshold that they need to get through in order to start to even see success? So that conversation has that.
I agree. That's perfect. And the last thing I'll add before we go is venture out of your own comfort zone as parents. Venture out of your own comfort zone. As I mentioned earlier today, very often our immediate circle looks just like us. And as parents, we have to model what we expect our children to be, do, behave. We know that, right? So not that old adage that was once kind of even communicated to me from my mom, do as I say, not as I do, right? No. We don't model that anymore. We say, I am the greatest example that you will see and that you will experience. And so because of that, I'm going to even move outside of my comfort zone to befriend, to learn more, to ensure that you're exposed to different, so that it becomes normal in our household when we see a child walking down the street with her head wrapped. You don't make fun of her. When you see a child who is of a different culture, who may have food that isn't American, considered American food, because very often that child feels ashamed. They don't feel like they belong. But when we start to normalize that and we think it's cool as parents, we create these children who start to embrace diversity. That's what we want. But we have to expect that from our educators, but we also have to model that at home. Thank you all so much for being here today. This was such an important conversation. And so what we will be doing after this is sending you notes, some highlight action items that then allows you to carry it forward and share with others. As well, this video will be on YouTube, so you can always send it to someone. And if for our next discussion, which is cultural competency and responsiveness. So if you or someone that you know is interested in being a panelist and adding to this conversation, please, by all means, be part of it. I want to thank my wonderful, wonderful panelists for being vulnerable and sharing their thoughts and insights as educators. I want to thank the wonderful, wonderful people who put time aside to join this important discussion. We send love and blessings and prayers for a very, very happy and healthy school year. And we thank you so much for joining. Look out for the recap of the highlights of this discussion and be well. Thank you so much for your time today.